Thank you to Justice for Muslims Collective and Witness Against Torture for co-sponsoring tonight's event with the Center for Constitutional Rights. I'm really glad to be here for this important conversation. I'm really excited to have Salim and Mike join us. They're great partners of the Center for Constitutional Rights, and I'm excited to make these connections and learn from them. So one of the first things I want to do is bring a CCR client and former Guantanamo prisoner, Tariq into the space. I think some of you are familiar with his story. Many of you have done a lot of great work organizing around his case. Tariq was just 23 years old when he arrived to Guantanamo in 2002. He was detained without charge for 14 years. In 2007, he began what would be a 9-year unbroken hunger strike. So these are his words. I did not choose the venue of hunger strike, yet it was rather the unjust people around me with their cruelty who gave me no choice but to do it. I, along with my brothers, have been coerced to do so many things in this place where humanity has been restrained and justice assassinated by injustice and the merciless. A captive does not possess any realistic means to send his messages to the world other than to strike. There is nothing greater to a human being than his religion and his freedom. My hunger strike has become my shield which would protect me. The hunger strike has nourished in me a sense of resistance and reminded me that the unjust cannot manipulate me as he pleases. He will not succeed in controlling me or controlling my destiny, for I am the one who controls it. So it's on behalf of Tariq and the other men that we represent that I'm here today, and I want to share with you a little bit about the ways in which they have resisted, that they have survived, that they are surviving their detention, and how their work has shaped my work, how their resistance has shaped my work as an advocate, and also identify some of the ways that many of you in the room and the broader coalition who's here in DC this week, marking the anniversary, have really uplifted Tariq and the other men at the prison. So why are we here today? So Guantanamo turns 18 on Saturday, and so that means an entire generation has only ever known a world in which Guantanamo has existed and in which we've been in endless war. We're also on the brink of perhaps another war, and it's important to mention that because war and detention go hand in hand. And in fact, the government has stated that the reason that they have the right to continue holding the 40 prisoners at Guantanamo until the end of hostilities and until the end of the war. And so the question is, what if the war lasts forever? And in court, the government even said, if the war lasts for 100 years, we can detain them for 100 years. And just as a reminder, all of the 40 men have either never been charged with a crime, or if they have been charged or convicted, have not had a fair trial that meets international human rights standards. We're also here to make connections and build solidarity. I think what makes Guantanamo exceptional is what has motivated many in our coalition to continue doing this work after so many years. But where we recognize that Guantanamo is part of a pattern of the dehumanization and criminalization of communities, we can find a lot of organizing potential, so I'm super excited about that. Before I start talking about Guantanamo as we understand it now, it's important to mention that before 9/11, Guantanamo was a site of violence, cruelty, and detention. Under the first Bush administration and the Clinton administration, over 12,000 Haitians were detained at Guantanamo at the Naval Center. They were eligible to apply for asylum in the US, but were denied because they were HIV positive. And the CCR's former president, Mike Ratner, actually challenged the detentions in the 90s. And some of the ways he described what he saw there, I think, resonate both with those of us working on Guantanamo and what we're seeing right now with immigrant detention in the US. The extreme heat, barbed wire, arbitrary beatings, hunger strikes, appalling detention facilities. He also recognized in the 90s that the government had argued somewhat successfully that Guantanamo was a law-free zone. And it's for these reasons that when President Bush transferred the first war on terror prisons to Guantanamo, he said, we have to be part of the fight, we have to lead this, because the government cannot capture nearly 800 people, citizens of other countries, and bring them to a place outside the law and beyond public scrutiny. So I just wanted to note that the US before 9/11 created a legal and physical infrastructure that allowed for future detentions. sure I'm already going over time. So there are lots of like exciting threads that I hope that we'll talk about in the discussion. And Maha, please signal to me when it's time to wrap up. I think for me, in thinking about the substance of this panel, thinking about narrative, thinking about the dehumanization of individuals, the dehumanization of prisoners, and also the state response to resistance within prison. So on the narrative piece, Guantanamo continues to operate because of this one narrative, which is that the men at Guantanamo are the worst of the worst, that they were captured on a battlefield, and if they're released, they'll go to a battlefield. I could run through all the factual reasons why that is false. It's absolutely false, but it still persists, despite the fact that 2 presidents, including the one who opened the prison, said it should close, and the fact that a number of national security officials, former prison officials have said, the people who were here are not the people we thought they were. It still persists, and I think it's because proponents of keeping Guantanamo open are seeing it more for its symbolic value and less for who it actually contains. As long as you have a prison on an offshore island that holds terror suspects, the pursuit of terrorism and the whole apparatus that involves can continue. And so you can always point to that because the symbolic value, I think, really overshadows the reality of who's there. And then lastly, on the narrative piece, this recidivism narrative that, even if people weren't dangerous before, Guantanamo surely has made them dangerous. And if they're released, they hate America. And unfortunately, last month, even in an oral argument, my colleague was arguing before federal judges, and one of them said more or less that same thing. Even if they weren't anti-American before, surely now, after what has happened to them, they would be. And that also, aside from the fact that more than 700 men have been released, are living peacefully and trying to rebuild their lives, it also puts the emphasis on what people might do and not what they've done. And I think that is what Guantanamo is really about now. And as it enters its 19th year, it has little to do what people have done, especially if they're not charged, there's no trial, but the fear of what they might do. So just on the hunger strike and protest piece, I've been doing this work for about 10 years. In 2012, I made my first trip to Guantanamo to meet our clients, and I've seen in different ways the way that they feel that they have been dehumanized by their experience, but also the way that they've tried to reclaim their dignity. And that looks different for everybody. For some of them, it was making art. For some of them, it was storytelling, poetry, reading and learning, and learning new languages for their future. And for some, it was hunger strikes. And all those things were a way for them to express individuality in a place where they were supposed to be broken and not be human. It was also a way for them to create community with each other and with the outside world. And so what's great about these anniversaries is being with people like Witness Against Torture and our other allies, because this is work that we've maintained over the years and means a lot to the men at Guantanamo to make connections with the outside world and have their messages and their stories get out. So just on hunger strike, Maha talked 1 minute. Okay, so Maha talked a lot about hunger strikes, and I'll say just from a more personal story, the story of Tariq Bauda. Tariq, because he was peacefully protesting, he was considered non-compliant. And I think that question of compliance and the tension between that and often human dignity is something that we can talk about more. Because of his hunger strike, he was held in Camp 5, which was essentially solitary confinement. He was force-fed twice a day. And as Maha mentioned, hunger striking became known as voluntary fasting. The US government called force feeding enteral feeding. And he was basically ripped out of his cell by a group of guards and strapped to a restraint chair and forcibly fed. And the government's reasoning for that was because they were trying to keep him alive. But Tariq knew very well it's because they were trying to break him, they were trying to humiliate him, and they were trying to deter other people from also doing the same. And so the disproportionate response, right, the most effective protest often meets the most extreme backlash. And I think in 2013, some of you are familiar with the mass hunger strike at Guantanamo, which had near universal participation. And for many of the men there, it was an opportunity for them to build community, and they saw the power of their protest. I mean, the world started watching again. President Obama started watching again, but they were met with really disproportionate violence from the prison authorities. I think I should need to stop there. Okay, well, we'll talk more, but yeah, there's a lot more to talk about.